Okay, so I'm not about to stand the new live-action version of Avatar. It had its good parts, but generally I was insulted by the fact that we have yet another direct adaptation. There's just no need for this, and I really wish Bryke had learned from 2010 that we don't want more content, we want more story. However, I did feel that the live-action Katara was a compelling iteration of the character, though she's not my Katara. Most people did not like it at all. I think a lot of people were underwhelmed with Gio and Dio's subdued performance of the character. She doesn't come off as fiery and passionate and determined as she is in the animated series. However, while this character has little in common with Mai Katara, she is in some ways a truer adaptation at her core in comparison to the other adaptees. If you've seen my video on Katara, you might know that I just find her to be the most heroic character in the original series. And I feel like a lot of the criticisms she gets are shallow and sexist. A lot of commenters didn't agree, but, it's my video. Make your own. Katara is both praised and derogated for her outspokenness, stubbornness, and commitment to her values. But part of what's so remarkable about her is that these things don't really come naturally to her, they weren't cultivated in her upbringing. She had to teach herself that justice and steadfastness were more important to her than protecting other people's feelings or being supportive. That's kind of what her arc is all about. At least until, the last scene. But let's not get into that again. In the very first moments of the original series, we see that Katara generally undercuts Sokka's offensive remarks with practiced wit and calm. It isn't until he says something misogynistic that she blows up at him. A similar thing can be seen in The Chase. Katara makes multiple level-headed attempts to get Toph to share the labor of the group. It isn't until Toph makes it clear that her values do not align with Katara's, that Toph doesn't share a sense of responsibility to the group, that she gets confrontational. That and the exhaustion and Toph slamming the door in her face. Katara spends the first season trying to negotiate standing up for what she believes in and standing up for herself. She goes back and forth a lot, trying to tie her sense of justice to her need for care and recognition. But she's not yet comfortable advocating solely for herself. She has to learn to fight against her impulse to suppress her own emotions. This is why I love her conversation with Hakoda in The Awakening so much. It feels like the first time Katara really expresses grief and loneliness in a way that entirely centers herself. Katara is an overwhelmingly emotional person, the fandom is right about that. But how often does she really let those emotions out? I'd argue not nearly as much as a person who has been through what she has probably ought to. So, while her superficial character traits aren't one for one, I felt a deeper truth in Katara's live-action portrayal than, say, Zuko's or Aang's. So, this version makes adjustments in Katara's character flaw, and it mainly does this to accommodate changes in Sokka's characterization. In the original, Sokka kind of cosplays as a leader, but we get the clear impression that no real weight has been placed on his shoulders. That's actually part of his baggage. He feels like he doesn't have a place in the world, no special skill. He doesn't see himself as having some unique ability or place, and that makes him feel, not very valued. But live-action Sokka really is a leader. His arc is more about his fears that he's not a very good leader. That's why he has an overt conflict having to do with whether he sees himself as a warrior or an inventor. In the original, this was more implicit. It wasn't so much a conflict in its own right, so much as it was an introduction to his actual conflict. Wanting to feel important, but understanding himself to have no worth. All of this together means that Sokka gets the arc of breaking out of assigned roles to pursue an authentic truth, which was kind of Katara's whole thing in the original series. So, these writers tweaked Katara's internal conflict. She's no longer fighting against patriarchal forces in her life, placing her in a caregiving role. She's a sufferer of intense survivor's guilt, whose trauma blocks her ability to access her emotions and to bend, her biggest goal. She's not a parental figure anymore, and she doesn't really deal with sexism at home, so this is a necessary change here. Her arc throughout the season has to do with opening herself up to the pain of the past, so that she can channel her life force and actually waterbend effectively. That's why we actually see the death of her mother, the event Katara feels directly responsible for. She can't access this amazing, unique thing she has inside of her because of guilt. And without her father, and with her brother just being a kid, there's no one around with the ability to help her understand that her mother's death wasn't her fault. Gran is a total weirdo in this version, so I think it's fair to assume that she didn't even try. As a result, Katara feels more like she's been abandoned by her family rather than put in charge of caring for it. Animated Katara also felt isolated and alone and abandoned, but she also had a place. They've just swapped one part of her character arc for another, and changed her character traits around to match that. The rawest part of Katara's psyche is pointed in just a slightly different direction, but this has huge ramifications for how Gyo and Dio portrays her. Rather than that sense of desperate optimism and meticulous warmth animated Katara brings to every scene, live-action Katara always needs to push herself to engage with others, to be an emotional and social being. Again, it's not my Katara, but that doesn't mean that the mechanisms underpinning her character are broken, and it doesn't mean that Gyo and Dio did a bad job portraying her. Also, I gotta say, I think a lot of these criticisms continue the trend of pigeonholing Katara as, like, a natural-born caregiver. Katara is not a natural caregiver, as I talk about in my video. She's a learned caregiver. If the main thing you get from Katara is that her essential nature is to be everyone's mommy, you're just not paying attention. Whatever. As I say about Katara in my original video, her priorities are to work on a broader scale than just helping individual people. Not suffice to help some people in a derelict town, she destroys the source of their distress. She frees an entire prison rather than just the one prisoner she feels responsible for. You could say that Katara was ruined, but in the end, she's just a very different character. I feel like Gyo and Dio really shines when Katara is fighting her impulses to shut down and not share her emotions. You can tell that even discussing her desires and hopes and pain takes a lot of effort for her. Even the words are difficult to get out. But she does it, because like the Katara we know and love, she has this innate drive to connect with other people through pain and hope. That's Katara on any level, a need for deep connection. That said, Pakku throwing her into a leadership position at the end of the season isn't empowering, it's just bizarre. She still has things to learn from him. Why are they leaving the North Pole? It doesn't make any freaking sense to me. I don't really get it. It's not a very good show, you guys. But I thought Katara was written decently, and the actor found a distinct way into Katara's mind. And I found her performance quite compelling. Now, please, don't make another season.